Riff Energy.
Welcome back to Big Riff Energy. It's Tuesday, March 5th. This is episode 51. Today we're going to be talking about a legendary technical death metal band that's in a league of their own. That's right. Nile will be the band and or album of discussion. Going to be focusing on Annihilation of the Wicked. You know what? Nile might actually be the first death metal band I ever heard. I always think it's death, spiritual healing that introduced me to that style of music. But In Their Darkened Shrines popped up the other day on the old YouTube. That thing came out in 2002. And it might be the first genuine death metal record I ever heard. It's either that or spiritual healing. I really can't remember. I didn't quite know what to do with Nile. You know, the heaviest thing I'd heard up to that point was probably Slayer or something like that. But man, I revisited some of that stuff, particularly Annihilation of the Wicked, and that's got to be an all-time great death metal album. Very unique. Obviously, focusing on Egyptian lore, a little bit of Lovecraft stuff. Super evil, super technical, but in tasteful ways. So that'll be the album discussion. That's going to be at the end of the episode. This whole episode is going to be devoted to answering your questions, your emails. And on that topic, if you've reached out to me about guitar lessons on the weekends and I haven't responded, I'm sorry. I will get back to you. I'm finishing up a record right now, so it's kind of taking priority over everything. We're in the home stretch, but I'm seeing your guys' emails. Don't worry, I will respond. And on that note, we're going to enter a new era here. You guys may be aware of another prominent YouTube channel that seems to have a pretty successful model that benefits the channel, that benefits the fans of the channel. It's a really good idea. It's a solid business model, it seems. So I'm going to adapt that today. I can already hear people talking shit. If you don't like it, you don't have to participate in it. It's fine. But I'm getting to a point where questions are like really starting to build up. Emails are really starting to build up. So if you are frustrated that you have emailed me and you have not heard a response on this podcast, I am now offering the option to PayPal me $10 and you can move your question to the front of the line, and it will guarantee no matter what that I answer your question or address your email on the podcast. There's a link in the description. You can send it to bigriffenergy@gmail.com, or you can click that link. I think it's paypal.me/bigriffenergy, but everything is Big Riff Energy. Email me at bigriffenergy@gmail.com. I'll get to as many questions as I can, but the channel's growing. It's starting to reach a point where I literally don't have the time to hit them all. So yeah, if you want to support the channel, feel free to do that. If you don't want to, that's fine too. I don't care, and there's no reason to complain about giving people that option. The YouTube payments themselves, honestly, don't even really cover the time that it takes me to do these. You know, it ain't bad, but I think my counterpart on the other channel I speak of called it, gas money. I think it like barely covers that. So it's nothing to write home about. And, I don't charge for much, really. I charge for the guitar lessons, pretty reasonable. And I think it's a good idea to offer people the option to support the channel directly, and you get your question answered no matter what. So that's now an option. All right, we're in a new era. I'm going to move on to the emails. Pat from Texas. You guys will see why I'm offering this. Pat, I'm sorry I had to cut down your email a bit, dude. It's a good story, but it is a lot. So this is a great email, and I did want to address it. So I hope you're not upset that I took some parts out. Pat was telling me about how he played in a band back in the mid 2000s and started working shows. What would you call it? Stagehand work, similar stuff that I did in Phoenix. Yeah, just working shows. Loading shit in, loading shit out. So Pat has a story about working shows in the mid 2000s. Here we go. One show we worked during this time was for Fantomas and The Locust. I was a fan of both bands, particularly Fantomas. I think I'm saying that right. Fantomas, if you go to Russia and you ask for Fanta, they don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You have to say Fanta. Okay. I was obsessed at the time with a lot of Mike Patton projects, Slayer, and was just getting heavily into the Melvins. In my head, I had built up a vision of the Fantomas dudes rolling up with a nice bus, being greeted by the promoter and shown to a green room with stuff from their writer, all very fluid and professional. But none of that stuff happened. The show was booked at a small shithole venue in San Antonio that no longer exists. It was a place I had seen some cool underground shows before, but not exactly a prime spot for what I considered rock royalty. My two friends and I showed up to the venue as instructed many hours before the bands were scheduled to roll into town. Did a bunch of odd jobs, various manual labor, and were generally just taken advantage of by the club owners. One thing that became very apparent to me that day was how utterly disorganized and unprepared the club was to host this gig. He talks about how they needed barricades. Somebody told them to put up barricades, but the club didn't have any barricades. So they rode in the bed of a rusty pickup truck to a warehouse that had haunted house equipment, and they got a bunch of traffic barricades. The day seemed to get progressively more ridiculous and unprofessional, and I, even as a dumbass 16-year-old, knew this was not how a club that hosted high-caliber musicians should be running. The bands arrived that afternoon in barely functioning 15-passenger vans pulling trailers. I was standing in the club when Buzz Osborne, Mike Patton, Trevor Dunn, and Dave Lombardo all walked in, bleary-eyed and road-worn, like they were just a bunch of dudes wandering into a truck stop. They were just a bunch of dudes wandering into a truck stop. Not that I expected them to act like rock stars, but these were guys I really looked up to, and it was hard to quantify that they were standing in, let alone going to play music in this borderline condemned building I'd been working in all day, violating child labor laws. The sound guy is fucking out to lunch. Yeah, my whole perception of a touring band's road life was coming apart at the seams. I helped where I could, but I kept thinking about these massively talented musicians, all extremely successful and revered in their respective genres, who were burdened with completely incompetent teenagers tasked with helping them stow away their precious gear in the middle of a very physically and mentally taxing tour. I pictured Dave Lombardo playing to tens of thousands at festivals with Slayer in the 80s and early 90s. Mike Patton on MTV with Faith No More, and Buzz Osborne rubbing elbows with Nirvana and the 90s Seattle scene. A far cry from where we were all standing at almost 2 a.m. in one of the sketchiest areas of downtown San Antonio. A lot of my perceptions of the live music world were turned upside down by that experience. The curtain had been pulled back, and I saw a barely functioning venue almost fail to pull off hosting a gig put on by some of the best musicians in the world. Those same musicians were driving themselves cross-country and were met with little fanfare, basically fending for themselves. This was confirmed over the next year as we continued to work and play shows around town. It seemed like everything could just come apart at any moment. It was hard to come to terms with the idea that music and bands I loved and cared about so deeply were shrugged off, not given the attention they deserved, so niche that it barely registered with a lot of others. How little some venues seemed to care when bands came to play was and is mind-boggling to me. This was a very long story, and I remind you guys that I cut this fucker down to like 50%. But my question is, did you have a similar moment where you realized how fragile that side of live music was? I wasn't naive enough to think it was glamorous and bands were getting rich. I knew it was a grind, but not quite at that level. I knew after that, bands had to really love doing this to keep going. There was not really a moment where I realized like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. Cause I just like, I came up completely from the bottom and came up like right as selling records was becoming no longer a thing. I mean, I cut my teeth at like the lowest possible level that there is. I started playing shows live before I could drive, like actual shows at actual venues. I mean, I was fortunate. I was in a small town in Oklahoma, but there was a venue run by a bunch of sketchy, weird hippies that would let touring bands play and the kids in town play. So, I mean, I was, that venue actually was like pretty professionally run. But yeah, that turned into, you know, driving out of town when we were still in high school and playing out of town, playing in Tulsa. That turned into what I've talked about before, playing Oshkosh, Wisconsin, places like that. And it just, I never had any illusion that what I was doing mattered to anybody except for me. That is a recipe for heartache. And we forget, you know, to guys like us, Dave Lombardo is like a huge deal. Buzz Osborne is like a huge deal. But let's start at the mainstream. I'll call it just like normie society has no idea who these guys are at all. We get so like focused on our little world, which is, you know, even at the biggest level, the metal world is still like a pretty niche thing. It doesn't, what's important or people who are well known in that world, it has no translation over into normal society at all, even at the highest level. Like 96% of people in the world probably don't even know who Kerry King is, somebody at that level, you know. So we get so insulated in this world that we care so much about, we forget that the vast majority of people are watching fucking Real Housewives or something, or Saturday Night Live, or just stuff that is like completely irrelevant to people like us. The stuff that's relevant to us, these fools have never even heard of, the vast majority of people. And then if you want to step it down a little more specifically to our world, you know, we're zooming in a little bit. If you zoom all the way out to just normal society, they don't give a fuck about any of this. Most people probably don't even know who James Hetfield is, right? If you zoom in to, let's call it the metal world, people that would maybe self-identify as like, oh, I love metal. You know, guys like you and me, Pat, know the names of everybody in Slayer. And then we look at what other stuff they're doing. I guess Dave Lombardo would really be the only guy that did a ton of other stuff. But I would say even most people that self-identify as Slayer fans don't have any idea what other bands Dave Lombardo has been in. Slayer is kind of a mainstream band in terms of the metal world. When I was younger, I kind of just assumed that most people who quote unquote loved a band had the same relationship with that band that I did, which is like, you get into Pantera and you're looking at pictures of Pantera, and you're looking at the shirts that they're wearing to try to find other cool bands. So then I see Phil Anselmo in a Dark Throne shirt, so I want to look at Dark Throne. See him in a Crowbar shirt, I want to figure out what Crowbar is. Then I'm finding out this guy's in other bands. And so then I'm listening to Down. And then I find out, well, who's in Down? Oh shit, a couple of these guys who have been in Crowbar were in Down. And you know the story. Anybody listening to this knows how that goes. But the vast majority of people that would self-identify as Pantera fans don't know any of that shit. The vast majority of people that identify as Slayer fans don't know who Phantomos is, even though the drummer of Slayer is in the band. They have no idea. And that was really driven home for me when I was in two pretty successful bands that were coming up at the same time, and realizing that most people who consider themselves to be like pretty serious fans of either band, a lot of times didn't even know about the other one. And it went both ways. It was really bizarre to people like us who are like actually really passionate and obsessed with this stuff. Somebody was asking me about Gibson guitars the other day because I sort of had a semi non-relationship going with them, or do, I guess. Who knows? I I read an interview the other day with James Hetfield, and I think it was 1986. I'm pretty sure Master of Puppets was out or about to be coming out, because he was playing Gibson guitars up until around that time, maybe shortly after Master of Puppets, and he switched over to ESP. And I read an interview with him where he explained why he switched to ESP. And it's because Gibson didn't know who he was, couldn't give a fuck about Metallica, even though Master of Puppets was out. Like, widely considered now to be the most important and best metal record ever made, you know. But even a guy like James Hetfield, 1986, a big mainstream guitar company like Gibson, like, couldn't even be bothered with this dude. Even at that level, Gibson Guitars wasn't giving him the time of day. And that's the reality of this situation. And that was in the 80s when metal was actually like, people were selling millions of records, you know, and it had a very fanatical fan base worldwide. And that fanatical fan base has continued to exist all around the world. But for whatever reason, in the United States, we are very fickle and prone to jumping on trends and allowing ourselves to be programmed by psychic manipulation and things like celebrity worship and stuff like that. So I don't know. There's a million different ways we could take this. I never had a moment where I was like, oh no, it's not what I thought it was. As far as touring and playing live, like, because I came up in the actual fucking trenches, you know, like doing the most difficult and thankless stuff that you could possibly do. I think the realization that I did eventually have is that there is no external payoff ever if you're not satisfied with yourself just internally as a person. That's the biggest revelation I ever had. So like, I mean, we see it when you have a guy at the status of Corey Taylor having to step away from touring because he was worried about relapsing or possibly like worse, you know. If that's not proof that there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, I don't know what is. So there, like the realization that I had is like the rat race thing, the constantly striving for more fans, bigger shows. It got even worse, that whole deal with social media, because then there's this false like slot machine kind of illusion of like engagement and stuff like that, and there's like a numerical value popping up in front of your face that you think has meaning, but it really doesn't, you know. All of that stuff, that'll drive you literally insane. So those four guys in Phantom Moss, they were doing that because they love playing that music, and that's it, because there's no other reason to do it. There's a lot of suffering that goes with that story that you just told. That's just like, if you apply that same amount of suffering to any other career, you'd be making a lot of money. Putting in that many hours of suffering and working hard, almost any other career field, you'd be making more money. And I hate to take it back to Yellowstone once again, but it's just like the parallels are just too obvious. Like those dudes, those ranchers, we got a neighbor down here who's got a little ranch, and he's talked to me about it a few times. It's like, you only do that because you love that way of life, and you love just spending time doing that sort of thing. Same thing as applies to making music and touring. And really, I guess the same thing applies to everything. Like if you're going to suffer, you should either suffer doing something that you really love, or you should suffer doing something that really pays you a lot of money. But there's no reason to suffer doing something that you don't like that doesn't pay any money. That was the biggest realization I came to over the 20 years that I've been getting in vans and stuff. So I don't know. I hope that answers the question. Also, it makes you identify this in your email as well, Pat. It makes you really appreciate the venues where you show up and they actually care about what you're doing. And there are a lot of those. Question 2, Pat. You guys see why I'm offering the ability to charge to move your question up to the front of the line now, huh? Okay. Pat says, I discovered Spirit Adrift in 2020 at the beginning of COVID when some website was debuting Harmony of the Spheres, which made me immediately pre-order Enlightened. The tapping intro at the beginning of Ride Into the Light reminded me in a good way of High on Fire's Snakes for the Divine. Is that section an intentional homage? Also picked up Ghost of the Gallows and recent Bandcamp Friday, very much digging it. Okay, Pat from Texas. Yeah, it kind of turned into one. That tapping thing, it's not tapping, actually. It's all pull-offs and hammer-ons. I was thinking about Thunderstruck. Right? I was more kind of thinking of Thunderstruck. Or like Am I Evil? There's a lot of great like classic metal and hard rock songs that start with a like fast left hand pull off hammer on thing. And I was listening to a lot of AC/DC and Def Leppard, believe it or not, early Def Leppard when I was working on Enlightened. So I was going for that. And then I kind of realized I could make a big epic sustained rhythm section type of intro under that. And then I realized that lead part would translate to the chorus that I had. So it sort of naturally ended up mirroring certain aspects of Snakes for the Divine, for sure. And when we played with High on Fire, first shows after the COVID lockdown, I remember saying something on stage about like, you know, this song shows me and Matt Pike's mutual love of Angus Young or something like that. I made a little joke out of it. But yeah, definitely it's a nod to Angus Young and to High on Fire, for sure. Good ear, bud. Bill, hey Nate, hope you're doing well, man. Super stoked to hear the new music. I wanted to see what you thought about Machine Head. I know Rob Flynn is pretty outspoken on political stuff and even accused Phil Anselmo of being a racist. But aside from that, just wanted your take on the band. I feel they are a little inconsistent with their albums and the new metal phase was rough. I guess Phil had another different term for the new metal phase. On the other hand, they have some damn good stuff. My favorites being Burn My Eyes, Blood, Stone, and Diamonds, Through the Ashes of Empires of Blackening. I kind of lost hope on them after I heard Catharsis. I just now started listening to some of their new album. Like what I've heard so far. By the way, just wanted to say thanks for getting me into awesome bands like Typo Negative, Enforced, Power Trip, and Fugitive. Take care, Bill. Cool, Bill. Man, I'm so glad I can help people get into cool music like that. That's the payoff of doing this podcast, man. It really is. I'm trying to right the ship as much as I can, you know. It may be hopeless, but we got to have somebody trying to right the ship or we're fucked. What was the quit? Oh, Machine Head. Yeah, I'm not really a fan, man. I just, I think had I gotten into the Good album that everybody likes when I was like 13 or something, it may have resonated with me, but I just kind of missed it. And they just seemed like, when I was coming up, you know, I got into really heavy stuff and really like what I would say legitimate, like true metal at a very young age. So by the time I had heard of Machine Head, it honestly just seemed kind of like poser music or something, like, yeah, new metal adjacent. I was always really into, I never really liked overly simple, bouncy, new metal-y guitar parts. Like the closest I'll get to that is Pantera. Or, yeah, I don't know. I guess Crowbar has like hardcore kind of breakdowns. But I like guitar. I like interesting guitar stuff. And I wasn't hearing that with Machine Head. You know, I felt the same way kind of about Hatebreed. Like I heard Perseverance when it came out and I was like, whatever, this is not... I've come to appreciate it a little bit more now, I guess. But yeah, I wanted some interesting stuff going on, and Machine Head never really offered that to me. And people have recommended records of theirs, like that last one everybody was freaking out about. Yeah, I distinctly remember after a show with Crowbar when their bandwagon ran out of gas or whatever because it was parked on a hill. That was in upstate New York somewhere. I remember sitting in the van and being like, oh, I'm going to put this Machine Head record on that everybody has been raving about. And I just I can't understand what the hype, there's nothing wrong with it. I think it appeals to like casual metal fans, the same people that listen to Slayer but don't know any of the other bands Dave Lombardo's in. I will say the bass player of Machine Head is like one of the nicest guys out there. He's like super into new upcoming, younger bands and stuff like that. He was super nice to us. I was spending a little time around Phil Anselmo. I'm only bringing this up because you mentioned it, the beef or whatever. And I've spent very little time around Rob Flynn, and I know who was cooler to me. That's all I can say. And you can probably infer from everything I just said, who was cooler to spend time around. I'll just put it that way. I got no problem with anybody, but yeah. Phil's always been cool to me. And I got a lot of friends of a lot of different races, and everyone I know that knows him personally, of all walks of life, they all love him. So I don't want to get too far into that, but yeah, I don't really, we're all us like dudes in metal bands are kind of supposed to be on the same team. And some of that shit seems to me like people were kicking a guy when he was down, and I think is a substance abuse, mental health thing, and not a racism thing. That's my take on it. And if that upsets you, I'm so sorry. You can pay me $10 and write me an email and cry about how I'm like excusing racist behavior or something. But yeah, I don't know. I don't care that much about Machine Head. Okay, Federico from Argentina. Hi, Nate. How are you? I have a dumb question about a band that you mentioned in more than one episode that I understand are called Dirt Mother. I wanted to ask you if that was the name, since I couldn't find any information about them anywhere. I'm loving the podcast so far. I think I listened to 30 episodes in a week or so. God damn, son. Greetings from Argentina. Cool, man. Thank you. Yeah, Dirt Mother from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Like the first show that I saw when I moved to Fayetteville, they were headlining. They're one of my favorite sludge bands, period. And yeah, I don't think there's anything that accurately represents the band now available online. But these dudes are some of my best buds, and I mentioned to their singer Tim that somebody was asking about them, and he said they are recording at the end of this month. So I'll keep you updated on all things Dirt Mother. Yeah, I mean, they sound like Church of Misery, Bongzilla, I Hate God. Yeah, Southern Sludge. I was going to say Electric Wizard, but not really. No, it's dirty, dirty, dirty. Southern Sludge, Sabbathy riffs. Maybe Thou. I hear a little bit of Thou in it. But they're real good. I think they're recording with Jeff Morgan from Wake. So more news on that soon. I guess they did some like, I don't know if it's like public access something. There's some kind of YouTube shit that somebody's doing in Fayetteville showcasing live bands and stuff. And you go to a stage and they like film you and put it online. But Tim said don't watch it because it sucks. He's very critical of his own music. It's probably a lot better than you think it is, Tim. Okay, Wayne in Australia. Curious to get your thoughts on Pearl Jam. They were my first favorite band. I was 13 in 93 when I first heard them. They blew my mind. Prior to them, my most played tape was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles soundtrack with MC Hammer. So I owe a lot to Pearl Jam. From there, I discovered Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, then Metallica, Pantera, Sepultura, and so on. I've stuck by Pearl Jam for 31 years now. I still love them, but obviously their output has varied in quality. I would say 10 and verses are driven by big riff energy. Yeah, I would too. But after that, things got a bit flat, for lack of a better term. Their live shows have always been great, though. Mike McCready can still fucking wail in that Hendrix SRV style. He'll always be a favorite player of mine. Yeah, dude, I don't know much about them. I've been hearing them, Hank. I've been hearing them as long as I've been aware of rock music, and 10's got to be one of the greatest rock records ever made, right? I think that's pretty clear. Great lyrics. You can fucking hear my dog groaning in the background arguing with me. Hank is like poser disposer. He only listens to like really heavy metal. But Pearl Jam's a great band, man. Some bands are just great bands, period, and it doesn't really matter if you like them or not. And the thing that sort of got me like, I'll just casually listen to them. I'm aware of a lot of their songs. I like a lot of their songs, like the guitar playing, like the vocals. But the thing that sort of got me like interested in them within the last 5 years was the Tom Petty documentary, Running Down a Dream, which is one of the greatest documentaries ever made. But there's a scene where they're, Hank, shut up, dude. Come here, sit down. Go to bed. There's a scene where the Heartbreakers are playing that song, The Waiting, which is one of my favorite songs. And Eddie Vedder sings it, and it's like, I'm getting goosebumps right now. It's so, I mean, talk about like nailing it. And then I watched their, I think it's called Pink Pop Festival in the 90s. Watch Pearl Jam. If you think Pearl Jam's a pussy band or whatever, watch Pearl Jam playing Pink Pop Festival. I mean, it is like intense. They come out like they're going to war, man. It's really cool. I think that's the one where he climbs like the big, huge camera arm and jumps off. But, dude, I love Pearl Jam. Just a great rock band. But like I said, I'm only really aware of the album 10. I think I've heard a little bit of verses. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wayne's also asking about, they announced a world tour recently, and the ticketing process has been a joke. I guess typically their fan club members get first access, but for this tour there were fewer fan club tickets available than fan club members. So lots of longtime club members missed out, and ticket prices have also gone through the roof, which is something Pearl Jam have always tried to avoid. Do artists at that level of popularity have much control over how ticketing is managed and how much tickets will cost? Do you think fee-paying fan club members should get guaranteed the option to buy a ticket to their local show? Man, all I can tell you is that I have never really, once hiring like professional booking agents, I've never had even been involved in a conversation about how much tickets cost. I think everybody has an understanding you want to keep it as low as possible, but I can't imagine at Pearl Jam's level that something you guys have to understand, that a band at that level, it's almost impossible. I would say it's as rare as like finding a unicorn walking around, that you're going to find a band member at that level that's involved in anything. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but you have to understand, like, to get to the level that Pearl Jam's at, they were doing the same shit that Phantom Moss was doing for who knows how long. There's no such thing really as an overnight success in the rock world. Sometimes there'll be, industry plant stuff that comes and goes in other worlds, but Pearl Jam's been a band for how long? At a certain point, you don't have the bandwidth. Like, you want to have a life too, So I highly doubt that those guys are personally involved in anything like that. I'm sure they want their tickets to be available to their fan club members and that sort of thing. But, there's just an infrastructure run by dudes that don't play in bands. Their job's to make money. So there's always going to be that push and pull. And I will tell you, somebody who has gone to war to keep tickets affordable and to keep scalping to a minimum and to keep hyper wealthy folks that only know one song out of the front row. You're not going to like it. What's the line in Prince of Darkness? I've got something to tell you, and you're not going to like it. Kid Rock. Yep. Kid Rock is an anti-Ticketmaster, anti-Live Nation demon. And that guy dedicated a lot of time and a lot of effort to preventing those corporate entities from making it impossible for working class people to attend his shows. So, however you feel about him, and I probably agree with you on some of it, that guy is sort of at the forefront, or was. I don't know if the war might be over after COVID. Honestly, it might be over for good. But what's his name? Bill Ritchie? Is that his name? Child of the Rock, dude. Kid Rock. The Machine Gun Man. Robert James Ritchie. At the front lines of the war against unfair practices by Ticketmaster and Live Nation. But yeah, I doubt Pearl Jam had anything to do. Like, I don't see Eddie Vedder being up late at night arguing with people about Ticketmaster stuff, personally. Could be wrong. All right, we're going to talk about Nile, Annihilation of the Wicked. I don't have a whole lot to say about it other than it's got to be one of the best death metal records ever. It's very, very technical. I've said this a lot, but then I keep talking about really technical death metal records and how much I love them. But, I was going to say I don't really lean that much into hyper technical metal music, but maybe I do, and I just don't want to admit it. But yeah, like I said, In Their Darkened Shrines popped up on YouTube, and just seeing the cover art sort of took me down a nostalgia thing. And I was like, oh yeah, I owned that at some point. I don't know if I ordered it from the Relapse catalog or got it at Hastings or what. But yeah, it came out when I was 14 years old. And so that was like the height of my curiosity and my like insatiable hunger for like the scariest, darkest, heaviest, most evil, brutal stuff. And I remember putting on In Their Darkened Shrines, and I was like, okay, I've found something that is like at the far limits of my brutality tolerance level. And I owned that CD up until when I left Arkansas. Actually, I had a giant CD binder, maybe a couple of them, full of my stuff from like age 12 to 18 or whatever. And I left it with my bandmates. But I owned In Their Darkened Shrines up until then. And I listened to it here and there. I never really explored Nile all that much. I liked it, but it just didn't quite have like the riff energy that I wanted. But for whatever reason, yesterday, I started listening to that record and I was like, that's pretty good. And I was like looking at their Wikipedia page and stuff. And I looked at Annihilation of the Wicked, and I looked at the scores and the reviews it got. Like, it was like 9, 9.5, 10, 9.5, 10. I'm like, okay, guess this one's pretty good. Man, for fans of Morbid Angel, Early Decapitated, Origin, H.P. Lovecraft, The Mummy starring Brendan Fraser, The Mummy starring Aleister Crowley, ancient Sumerian gods turning you into dust and filth, and reading incantations from books bound in human flesh, and studying hieroglyphics to awaken ancient forces of evil. And it's really badass. If you haven't listened to Annihilation of the Wicked by Nile, listen to it, because even though I only really started checking it out yesterday, I think it might already be becoming one of my favorite death metal records. I'm a little bit ashamed I didn't allow myself to go down the Nile rabbit hole a little sooner. Dude, speaking of working shows as a stagehand, though, I used to do that. I used to do AV and sound and load ins and load outs and stuff like that. And I have it on very good authority that Carl from Nile is not a guy that you want to load in gear for. So my heart goes out to any stagehands out there who are forced to endure the punishment of the ancient Sumerian god Carl Sanders. But that notwithstanding, he makes some really cool music. So, highly recommended. Man, for what it is, I would give it a 10 out of 10. Or a 9.5 out of 10. Nah, I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Yeah, Annihilation of the Wicked by Nile. It'll take you somewhere. It's very unique, but very familiar and super heavy and a lot of fun. So take a little trip to ancient Egypt with your tour guide, the mighty Carl Sanders from Nile. Long-winded too, man. He every song I guess has like a million liner notes and little factoids and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty masturbatory liner notes. Not a great sign, but the music's really good. Okay. If you have questions, email me at bigriffenergy@gmail.com. If you want a guaranteed response, shoot me $10. It'll help support this channel. It'll keep me going, man, while I'm trying to finish this damn record and simultaneously crank out actual Big Riff energy and not just talk about it. So thanks for supporting the channel. And if you don't like the idea of sending me $10 just for me to talk, then don't fucking do it. It's America. You got the freedom to do whatever you want. All right. See you next week.